Welcome to the Robert Wenzel Show. Please stand by for Robert Wenzel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Robert Wenzel Show. I'm Robert Wenzel. My guest today is famed investor, global traveler, and author Jim Rogers. He's written a slew of books, which we'll list at my website, economicpolicyjournal.com. They include Investment Biker, a book he's written for his daughters, and so on. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, first let me ask you, of your books, I kind of like the Investment Biker. Which one has been the best seller for you? Which one do people seem to like the most?
Well, Robert, I don't have a clue, and the reason is because I won't let my publisher tell me.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to jinx it, and so far it's been successful. All of my books are still in print, and as you probably know, it's rare that books stay in print for many years. So I don't know if I've been successful in not jinxing it or not, but I don't know. I don't know the sales volumes for any of them, and I've asked not to be told.
Okay, gotcha. So I see in the news that your most recent venture, you're now a consultant for an agricultural corporation that is connected or is owned by the Russian government. What's going on there?
Well, I'm very bullish on agriculture worldwide for many reasons, and Russia, where I've been extremely negative for many years, seems to be making changes, the government anyway, and this investment company, VTB it's called, is owned by the Russian government, and they're making major changes, major investments in Russia, and they've asked me to be an advisor, and I've accepted because I think I see major changes taking place in Russia, and I'm bullish on agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of advice are you giving them? Are you giving them advice on how to set up exchanges to trade crops or how to set up more free market oriented agriculture in Russia? You know, what are you telling them?
Well, at the moment, they're looking to make investments in agriculture. Who knows where it might go down the road? All nations that change, it could lead anywhere. Look at China. China started changing 34 years ago, and look what's happened since. They didn't even have a stock exchange 34 years ago. Now they do. So I don't know where it's going to go, but the original purpose is to find investments in agriculture in Russia and to make those investments.
I see. So in other words, this is a Russian-owned company, but you're going to be sort of looking for opportunities within the country itself and not outside Russia? I mean, say, South America or something like that?
This is a Russian-owned investment company.
Right.
Money will come from Russia and from others as well. I mean, the Russian government will put up some money, but who knows? The Chinese may put up some, the Brazilians. I don't know where the money's going to come from. It's going to come from outside investors and internal investors with the purpose of making investments in agriculture in Russia.
Okay. Now, Jim, you were one of the early guys. I mean, you called it on agriculture way early, and the droughts helped you out a little bit this year. But what did you see? How did you understand that agriculture would be such a strong play, and it looks like it will be for many years to come?
Well, I could see that first nobody had been making much of an investment in agriculture for decades. Agriculture has been a horrible business, certainly since the early 80s. And because of that, you have very little money invested in agriculture. And whenever you have not very much money or little money invested in any sector, it means productive capacity goes down, supply goes down. And when supply goes down, especially if demand is going up, that leads to a bull market. So I could see all this happening and realize that agriculture had to be a very good place to invest.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, it's still pretty much a wide open opportunity. I just received an email report from someone I talk to regularly out of Indiana, and he tells me farmland prices are going up, but it's the Amish that are in Indiana buying up the farmland. It doesn't seem to be sort of something that has caught the eye of Wall Street yet to any significant degree.
There are people buying farmland in the U.S. and elsewhere, but for the most part, it's not a big trade yet for most people. I was actually at a conference yesterday in Singapore, and most of the agriculture people there were saying that it's very hard to attract money to invest in agriculture. I mean, I'm very bullish. I can give you all the reasons I'm bullish, and they can give you all the reasons to be bullish. But for the most part, this is not something where people are rushing in with a lot of money. I think Apple Computer probably it's easier to raise money for Apple than it is for a farm.
Right. So an individual investor who sort of buys into your thinking on agriculture, what would you advise him? I mean, are there stocks out there? Should he buy companies that have farmland holdings, companies that support the agriculture industry, or should he just go out there and buy farmland? What's your thinking on that?
Well, people should only invest in what they themselves know a lot about. They shouldn't listen to some guy they hear on the computer and start making investments. So if they can spell agriculture and if they know a lot about agriculture, you can find investment in many ways. You could buy tractor companies, you can buy seed companies, you can buy fertilizer companies, you can buy developers in the farm belt, you can buy retailers in the farm belt. If I'm right, the farmers are going to have a lot of money in the next few decades. You can buy futures themselves. The best way, of course, is if you know about agriculture, you can get enormous leverage buying futures, buy rice futures or whatever you decide, sugar futures, depending on what you know about and what you decide. Or you can become a farmer. I guess the best way to do it is to become a farmer. Go buy yourself some farmland or lease some farmland, become a farmer. Because if I'm right, the incomes of farmers are going to go through the roof. The value of farmland is going to go through the roof. The production every year is going to go through the roof. So there are many ways to do this, but don't do anything unless you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as specific agricultural products, are there some that are more your favorites from the work you've done? And you mentioned sugar. Is sugar, in your view, a better investment than cattle?
If you do your homework and you know about agriculture,
right,
and you decide to invest in sugar, then invest in sugar futures. I don't know which is the best.
I just wondered if from your reading, or in your research, whether you said, sugar looks like because of this, and that, it has more upside than cattle does. Not necessarily advising a person just to go in one direction or another, but if they intend to do research, is there an area where you would recommend that looks, in your view, more interesting than another?
I own all agricultural products. For most investors, many studies have showed that the best way to invest is to index investing. Many studies have shown that passive investing or index investing outperforms active managers 70 or 80% of the time, year after year after year. So whether you're talking about stocks or commodities or bonds or currencies, for most people, investing in an index is the time-honored way. If you know a lot about agriculture, there are other ways as well, but for nearly everybody in the world, every investor in the world, if you invest in an index, you will outperform nearly all other active managers.
Mm-hmm.
I invest in the agricultural index. I invest in the Rogers Agricultural Index because for many reasons. That's the way I do it.
Okay, now let's move on to another topic. You've traveled the world. There's a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. Do you have any specific insights into the Middle East or any thoughts on what may happen there?
Well, I do know that nearly all the players in the Middle East seem to be making mistakes, and there are many players. This is, God knows there are a dozen or a couple of dozen players in the Middle East. It's not just the Israelis and the Americans, say, or the Muslims or something. Lots of players. And most of them seem to be making mistakes. I expect food prices to go much, much higher over the next few years. Whenever that's happened throughout history, it's led to social unrest. We're already having social unrest in the Middle East and the rest of the world. You're going to have more social unrest. You're going to have more governments fail. You may even have more countries fail. So I expect to see a lot more social turmoil, not just in the Middle East, but including the Middle East, but worldwide. And you're going to see more serious problems, internal problems in nearly every country in the world.
Mm-hmm. In the Eurozone, there's a report out today in the Financial Times that there might be a possibility that Spain might break up the Basque separatists and other separatist movements in different regions. Do you see anything like that happening, or?
Well, I wrote a book once called Investment Biker, and in that book I made the point that I know of no country in history or in the world as we know it that has lasted as long as 200 years with the same borders and the same government. So it wouldn't be surprising. It would be normal for more countries to continue to break up. We've had at least, 10 or 12 countries break up in the past decade or two. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Ethiopia and Eritrea. Sudan recently. We've had a lot of Soviet Union. We've had a lot of countries break up, and that's going to continue. But that's the way it's been throughout history. As I said, I don't know of any country in world history that's lasted as long as 200 years with the same borders or the same government. So you're going to see a lot more of that.
So do you think the seeds are planted in the United States, that could happen to the United States?
Well, all I can tell you is it's never happened in any country in history, so why can't it? I mean, there are people in the United States who want to separate from the U.S. It's not a very strong movement. Most of them are considered nuts or radicals right now, but who knows? Who knows?
Now, what's your thinking on China? I'm kind of bearish given, from a distance, I see a government that is very heavily involved in the economy and in creating all kinds of structures and apartments and infrastructure that doesn't seem to be necessary. And now they have an inflation problem, so they're slowing down on that. But you seem to be more bullish on China.
Well, I'm more bullish on China than I'm on most countries, but I'm not quite sure how you define bullish. I'm not rushing out and buying Chinese stocks, if that's what you're talking about. But I do expect China in the 21st century to be an enormously successful, if not the most successful country in the 21st century. If you look at America in the 19th century, we had horrible problems. We had a terrible civil war. We had many depressions with a D. We had very little in the way of the rule of law. We had virtually no human rights in the 19th century. America was a mess in the 19th century, and yet out of that, we became the most successful country in the 20th century. I would certainly expect China to have many problems going forward, just because everybody who rises, whether it's a company or an individual or a family or a country, has setbacks along the way. But in the end, I suspect China is going to be the most successful country in the 21st century. Will there be problems? There'll be huge problems. I don't know what, when, why, or how, but I know that's the way the world works.
Would you recommend the Chinese currency as an investment at this point?
I own the Chinese currency. I'm not thinking about selling it. Periodically, when I can, I buy more. You can't just pick up the phone and buy a lot of renminbi.
Right.
Because it's still a semi-blocked currency. But whenever I can, I try to buy more because I fully expect it to go much higher over the next several years or decades.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what is the best way? Say somebody in the United States who wants to buy the currency. I mean, is there an easy way for them to do it, or is it pretty difficult?
Well, I'm told that there's an ETF, or at least one, maybe more than one ETF for the Chinese currency. I think it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, if I'm correct. You can open Chinese bank accounts, Chinese currency bank accounts in the U.S. Everbank, which is on the internet, will offer you, I think at least they used to, it would offer you Chinese bank accounts, Chinese currency bank accounts. The Bank of China has a branch in New York and perhaps other cities where you can go in and open a bank account in renminbi. I mean, all this is fairly straightforward. Nothing magic about walking into a bank and opening an account, and the Bank of China is there in New York and perhaps other cities, and certainly in other cities in the world. So there are various ways to do it. Go to China and open a bank account if you want to. I mean, again, I want to repeat, it's not like picking up the phone and buying a lot of euros or something, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what about oil? What's your thing? I know you're not a short-term trader, so I would imagine you're not fazed by the recent drop in oil over the last few days, but what are your thoughts long-term on oil here?
Well, I think the surprise is going to be how high the price of oil stays and how high it eventually goes. We're running out of, the major gigantic elephant deposits, which were discovered all more than 40 years ago, are all in decline. There are new discoveries, and we certainly have shale oil coming up, but I would expect the price of oil to stay high and go much higher. Now, if suddenly Spain goes bankrupt out of the blue or something, then obviously everything is going to collapse in price. But I would suspect that would be temporary. Governments around, if the world economy gets better, the price of oil is going to go much higher. If the world economy doesn't get better, governments are going to print money. It's the wrong thing to do, but that's what they do. They don't know anything else to do. And so whenever you've had money being printed, currency debasement, the way to protect yourself and actually make money is to own real assets. So I would suspect you're going to see higher prices of oil over the next several years, and of all real assets, agriculture, silver, oil, energy, everything.
Yeah. Have you looked into the municipal bond market here at all in the United States? I would imagine you're probably hesitant to do any investing there, but do you have any thoughts on how serious a problem there might be with it?
Well, I do know that many, as you know, many states and cities have serious problems, certainly in their pension funds. California apparently is bankrupt, New York, Illinois. I mean, I haven't done any in-depth analysis here because I'm not buying municipal bonds. I'm not bullish on bonds at all anywhere in the world. Maybe short-term bonds or maybe some special situations bonds would be okay, but no, I'm skeptical of the bond market. I suspect the bond market, we've been in a bull market in long-term bonds for 31 years. That bull market is coming to an end eventually, whether it's this week or this month or this year, I don't know. But I'm very skeptical of bonds anywhere.
Right. I recall reading one time about you that when you analyzed the company and you looked at their balance sheets and their 10Ks, you actually manually went through and worked out the numbers because you didn't trust the computers, software programs, and things like that. Do you still do things that way manually?
Well, and I'm a little lazy now. I don't do it like I used to. No, but at times I certainly did got a better feel for the numbers that way. I can remember in Japan that the market technicians, the chartists, the really great ones used to do their charts by hand too, because they felt they got a better feel by actually putting the pen or the pencil on the paper and drawing in the chart. So I'm not the only old-fashioned kind of person, and whether it's good for people or not, I don't know. Everybody has to do their own way.
Yeah, I tend to, in some of the data, I keep even money supply numbers and growth. I tend to do all those manually myself because I think you really do get more of a sense and a feel for it versus just sort of looking down at the numbers. So
that's been my history and apparently other people's history too. But everybody has to do it their own way.
Right, right. Now, getting back to the Eurozone, I mean, do you think the euro is going to survive? Is Greece going to continue to be part of the euro? And is this important for a U.S. investor? Or
I don't see how the euro can survive, at least not as we know it. There are going to be people coming and going. I've explained to you that I'm extremely pessimistic about stability in the world going forward because you're going to see a lot more price increases, food price increases, and that's going to cause more social unrest and therefore more political and economic turmoil. There are 17 members of the euro right now, so you're going to have some politicians who are going to make their reputation or their careers by attacking the euro, and some will pull out or some will get thrown out, whatever it is. So I don't see how it can survive as we know it. It is a shame because the world needs something to compete with the U.S. dollar, and as you know, the U.S. dollar is not a terribly sound currency anymore. We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. So the world needs something to compete with the U.S. dollar. The euro, on paper anyway, the concept of the euro is a fabulous thing to compete with the dollar. Unfortunately, the execution is not nearly as good as the concept.
do you see at some time the dollars that are being held overseas by central banks and just regular investors coming back and hitting the shores again? I mean, will the dollar no longer be the reserve currency at some point, the world reserve currency?
Everything that's ever been used as a reserve currency has changed eventually, and that's going to happen to the U.S. dollar too. 80 years ago, the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency and medium of exchange. That's no longer the case. And the people who saw that change made a lot of money. The people who didn't see the change lost a lot of money. The U.S. is now the largest debtor nation in world history. There are already people moving away from the U.S. dollar, and that's going to continue unless and until the United States shapes up and cleans up its act, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. Not anytime soon, anyway.
Outside of China, do you have a favorite current country now where you can say, wow, it looks like things are going well there, where you would recommend people taking a look at it as investment potential?
Oh, sure. There's some fabulous opportunities in the world. Myanmar, if I could put a lot of money into Myanmar, I would. North Korea, I'm very excited about in North Korea. There's no way for me to invest in North Korea that I know of other than to buy stamps or gold coins or something from North Korea. Angola, or 2 or 3 African countries where there are great opportunities. Russia, I'm getting bullish on Russia for the first time in my life. There's plenty of play. There are always plenty of opportunities on both the long side and the short side.
Which ones in Africa are the ones you like?
Tanzania, I see opportunities. There are plenty of positive changes. If and when there's a Mr. Mugabe in Zimbabwe dies, and he's nearly 90 years old, I mean, he may never die. But if and when he dies, maybe great opportunities there. You have to, each country is different. It's like each stock is different. Everybody has to figure it out for themselves. But I certainly see plenty of opportunities in some African countries.
What excites you about North Korea? It doesn't seem for an outsider that hasn't looked. Go ahead.
Well, that's because you listen to American propaganda.
Right, true.
Not many Americans have even been to. My wife and I went to North Korea not too long ago, and one of the first things I noticed was that everywhere in North Korea they were advocating unification of North and South Korea. Now, if you listen to American propaganda, you would say, "Oh, those guys up there in the North are crazy, and they don't want it to have anything to do with anybody." But propaganda, to use that term, in North Korea is pro-unification with the South. And I found that everybody that I ran into up there is in favor of it. Now, the father died, depending on how you look at it, the son died, but there's now a new kid running North Korea. He's 30 years old. I mean, first of all, he grew up, he was educated in Switzerland, so he knows what's going on out there in the outside world. And I'm sure that he doesn't particularly like living in a Spartan, austere nation with no outside influences. But more important, or equally as important, all of his generals, when they were young, they were lieutenants or captains, and they went to Beijing, they went to Moscow, they went to Shanghai. Now they go back as generals 30 years later, and they say, "Oh my God, can you imagine what's happened in Beijing? You know what's going on in Moscow?" They've seen staggering changes, and they know the difference in the 30 years in North Korea and the 30 years in China. The difference in opening up and staying closed. So the generals all know the difference. The kid knows the difference. The North Koreans have been told for decades, or years anyway, that unification is good. The main people are against it are the Japanese, because the Japanese don't want to have to compete with the United Korea. The United Korea would have maybe 75 million people right there on the Chinese border. North Korea has a lot of natural resources, which Japan doesn't. North Korea has cheap, disciplined, educated workforce. The South has huge amounts of capital and expertise. So a combined Korea would be a huge competitor to the Japanese. The Japanese would not be able to compete because they don't have the natural resources, and they're a high-cost nation to do business. The Chinese are building bridges into North Korea. I mean, the Chinese are pouring in. So the main people against it are the Japanese, and therefore America. I'm not quite sure why America, either because the Japanese are opposed to it or just because America's, got a bureaucracy which is very much in favor of no changes. But in Korea, the change is coming.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, thank you very much, Jim. It's been very educational, as always, when you get on the horn, and I thank you very much for taking the time. Good luck with your investments in your new advisory position in Russia. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Robert. We'll do it again. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Robert Wenzel Show. This is Robert Wenzel. Be sure to check out my website, economicpolicyjournal.com, where I blog 7 days a week about economics, finance, politics, and liberty. Executive producer of the Robert Wenzel Show is Chris Rossini. Head of editing and mastering is John Daubert.